My fellow Africans, brothers and sisters across this vast continent, and all who bear witness to the enduring scars of injustice, I stand before you today not to whisper comforts, but to roar against the shadows that still cloak our lands in chains. We speak of neo-colonialism, that insidious ghost of empires past, which has never truly departed our soil. From the days when colonial flags were lowered, only to be replaced by the invisible banners of economic domination, the Western world, and let us be clear, their allies in exploitation, has woven a web of cruelty that drains Africa of its lifeblood. This is no relic of history. It festers today, in 2025, as raw and ruthless as ever. Let us begin with the heart of the matter, the relentless plundering of our resources. Africa's earth is rich with minerals, gold, cobalt, oil, diamonds, that power the gadgets, vehicles, and luxuries of distant nations. Yet, what do we receive in return? Not prosperity, not partnership, but a hollowed-out continent. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, foreign mining giants extract cobalt essential for electric batteries, leaving behind communities mired in poverty while profits flow to boardrooms in Europe and North America. This is neo-colonialism's core. The Western world offers no genuine good for Africa, only the illusion of development masking exploitation. They come not as benefactors, but as extractors, siphoning our raw materials to fuel their economies, while our people labor in hazardous conditions for meager wages. In Ghana, gold mining operations, often controlled by foreign entities, echo this pattern, where local wealth is exported, and the benefits rarely trickle down to the grassroots. The result? A cycle of dependency, where Africa remains the supplier of cheap commodities, forever tethered to volatile global markets that favor the powerful. But the cruelty deepens beyond mere theft. It poisons the very essence of our existence, our waters, our soils, our skies. Mining operations, driven by foreign capital, pollute our rivers and lakes with toxic chemicals and heavy metals, turning life-giving waters into streams of death. In regions like the Niger Delta or the copper belts of Zambia, oil and mineral extraction has led to widespread water contamination, where trace metals from mine waste seep into aquifers, rendering them unfit for drinking or irrigation. These pollutants, mercury, arsenic, cyanide, do not vanish. They linger, infiltrating food chains and devastating crops. Farmers watch helplessly as their yields wither, poisoned by the residues left behind from irresponsible mining practices that prioritize profit over people. And what of the weather, that once predictable rhythm of seasons that sustained our ancestors? Neo-colonial exploitation destabilizes it through deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, and altered landscapes. Large-scale mining clears vast swaths of forest, contributing to local climate shifts, erratic rains, prolonged droughts, that exacerbate food insecurity across the continent. In South Africa or the Sahel, where mining intensifies water scarcity amid rising temperatures, communities face floods that carry chemical contaminants, further eroding soil fertility and crop health. This is no accident. It's a calculated disregard, where foreign firms exploit weak regulations to dump waste, knowing the long-term havoc, reduced biodiversity, health crises, and agricultural collapse will be borne by Africans alone. How, you may ask, does this persist in an era of supposed sovereignty? The answer lies in the betrayal from within. Our so-called leaders, those entrusted with the sacred duty to protect our people and lands, who instead auction them off in the marketplace of self-interest. These figures, cloaked in the trappings of power, forge deals with Western corporations and their proxies, trading national wealth for personal fortunes. In the DRC, cobalt contracts riddled with corruption allow foreign multinationals to thrive while local governance crumbles under bribes and informal taxes. Leaders sign away mining rights for kickbacks, luxury homes abroad, or slush funds that never reach the public coffers. In Nigeria's oil sector, neo-colonial pacts with giants like Shell have been enabled by corrupt officials who overlook environmental safeguards in exchange for illicit gains, perpetuating a legacy of spills and degradation. This is the mechanism. Foreign powers dangle loans, aid, or infrastructure promises, often laced with strings, that bind nations in debt, while leaders pocket the proceeds. Weak governance invites this. Corruption fertilizes it. In Ghana, mutual capitalist motivations between local elites and foreign miners blur lines, but the outcome is the same: exploitation that enriches a few at the expense of many. Across the continent, from Angola's diamonds to Tanzania's gas fields, leaders prioritize short-term personal enrichment over sustainable development, selling out ancestral lands and condemning generations to poverty and pollution. Dive deeper with me into this abyss. Consider the intricate web, Foreign firms lobby through development agencies, offering bribes disguised as consulting fees or campaign contributions. Leaders, facing electoral pressures or personal ambitions, acquiesce, enacting laws that favor expatriate companies, tax holidays, lax environmental standards that strip away protections. In return, these leaders gain access to offshore accounts, elite education for their kin, or even political asylum when scandals erupt. The people. They inherit poisoned wells, barren fields, and unstable climates that force migrations and conflicts. In the Sahel, mining's water demands amid climate volatility heighten tensions, as communities compete for dwindling resources contaminated by chemical runoff. This internal complicity amplifies external cruelty. Without it, neo-colonialism would falter. Yet it thrives because our leaders, in their selfish calculus, value villas in Paris over villages in their homelands. The Western world exploits this fracture, portraying Africa as inherently corrupt to justify their interventions, all while their corporations evade accountability for the devastation they unleash. And so, this fracture widens, bleeding our continent dry even as we speak, in this very year of 2025, where the echoes of colonial boots have morphed into the subtle hum of drones and the click of sanction buttons. The exploitation creeps insidiously into every crevice of our present, not as a faded memory but as a living, breathing monster that devours our sovereignty daily. Foreign corporations, backed by Western governments, continue to dictate terms in mining leases that span decades, locking in low royalties and environmental impunity while African nations grapple with the fallout. Rising debt from development loans that fund these very extractive industries, climate refugees fleeing mine-induced disasters, and economies skewed toward raw exports that keep us perpetually underdeveloped. In the Sahel, uranium mining in Niger by French firms like Orano persists, fueling nuclear plants in Europe while local communities suffer radiation exposure and water depletion, their voices drowned out by security narratives that justify military presences. This is the neo-colonial present, algorithms and aid packages that monitor and manipulate, ensuring Africa's resources flow outward, unhindered, while our youth migrate in desperation, only to be met with Fortress Europe. Yet, the deepest cut comes from the systematic elimination of those rare leaders who dare to rise against this tide, who envision an Africa unbound by foreign strings. Time and again, when a visionary emerges, championing resource nationalization, Pan-African unity, or debt repudiation, the Western machinery springs into action. First, a smear campaign through their media empires, painting these leaders as tyrants, dictators, or threats to global stability. Then, the coup, the intervention, the assassination, all cloaked in the noble rhetoric of restoring democracy or protecting human rights. It is a playbook refined over decades, turning potential liberators into villains in the eyes of the world, justifying their violent removal as a necessary evil. Africa has long bled from the hands of Europeans and their allies, Belgium, France, Britain, the United States, who, post-independence, shifted from direct rule to proxy control, ensuring that any challenge to their economic fiefdoms is met with lethal force. Let us delve into the blood-soaked annals of this treachery, starting with Patrice Lumumba, the fiery first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, whose dream of a united, resource-sovereign Africa in the early 1960s directly threatened Belgian mining interests in Katanga's copper and uranium riches. Lumumba, elected democratically in 1960, sought to nationalize Congo's vast mineral wealth, declaring independence not just political but economic from the colonial yoke. Western media, outlets like the New York Times and BBC, swiftly branded him a communist sympathizer, a Soviet puppet endangering the free world amid Cold War paranoia, despite his appeals for non-alignment. The CIA, with Belgian complicity, orchestrated his arrest and execution in January 1961. He was beaten, tortured, and shot, his body dissolved in acid to erase the evidence. This was sold as stabilizing a chaotic nation, restoring order after independence fervor, but it installed Mobutu Sese Seko, a corrupt puppet whose 32-year reign looted Congo's resources for Western gain, amassing billions while the people starved. Lumumba's blood marked the beginning of a pattern. Europe's grip on African minerals tightened, and the pattern of demonization ensured no successor would dare the same. Fast forward to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary captain who seized power in Burkina Faso in 1983, rebranding the nation from Upper Volta to honor its African roots and launching a radical agenda against neo-colonial exploitation. Sankara rejected IMF loans that would saddle his people with debt, promoted self-sufficiency in food and health, and nationalized land to break foreign agribusiness holds, actions that irked France, whose companies dominated Burkinabe cotton and minerals. Western press, from Le Monde to Time magazine, depicted him as a erratic Marxist, a mad dog of Africa whose reforms threatened regional stability, ignoring his literacy campaigns that doubled school enrollment and vaccinated 2.5 million children in weeks. On October 15, 1987, he was assassinated in a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, backed by French intelligence and CIA whispers. Sankara was gunned down in a council meeting, his body riddled with bullets. The narrative: a democratic correction to end his authoritarianism, though Compaoré's 27-year kleptocracy followed, opening doors wider to French mining firms that extracted gold while poisoning rivers. Sankara's vision of an Africa free from foreign aid strings died with him, but his murder exemplified how leaders challenging resource plunder are first vilified as anti-democratic, then erased to restore a compliant order. This cruelty persists into our era, as seen in the brutal fall of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's enigmatic leader who, by the 2000s, pivoted from pariah to Pan-African advocate, proposing a gold-backed African dinar to upend the dollar's dominance in oil trade and uniting the continent against Western financial hegemony. Controlling Africa's largest oil reserves, Gaddafi invested petrodollars in African infrastructure. The Great Man-Made River Project, support for the African Union, while funding anti-imperialist causes that rankled Europe and the US. Western media frenzy painted him as a terrorist sponsor, a genocidal madman during the 2011 Arab Spring, amplifying unverified atrocity claims to justify NATO intervention under UN Resolution 1973, ostensibly for civilian protection and democracy. Bombs rained from French, British, and American jets. Gaddafi was captured by rebels, sodomized with a bayonet, and shot dead on October 20, 2011, his death celebrated in headlines as the dawn of Libyan freedom. Yet, what followed was chaos. Oil fields fragmented among Western firms, slave markets in Tripoli, and a failed state where migrants suffer in detention centers funded by EU deals. The restoration of democracy was a facade for reclaiming oil access, bleeding Libya, and by extension, Africa's unity, dry, much like the coups that felled earlier giants. Even Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's founding father and Pan-African icon, fell to this blade in 1966, after championing the Organization of African Unity and nationalizing foreign assets to fund true development. Branded a dictator by BBC and CIA-fed outlets for his one-party state experiments, he was ousted in a coup while abroad, with US and British fingerprints in the planning. The democracy restored installed a regime friendly to Western gold and cocoa barons. These are not isolated tragedies but a continuum of violence, where Europe's heirs, through media, intelligence, and military might, ensure that Africa's blood continues to lubricate their machines of profit. From the forests of Cameroon, where Reuben Niobe was slain by French troops in 1958 for resisting colonial holdouts, to Togo's Sylvanus Olympio, shot in 1963 by soldiers trained by France to prevent his economic independence, the pattern endures: challenge the exploitation, face the smear, then the grave, all in democracy's name. Today, whispers of similar fates haunt leaders in resource-rich nations like Mali or Zimbabwe, where sanctions and propaganda isolate those who defy the resource rush. And yet, in the face of this relentless hemorrhage, a new dawn stirs across our lands, a surge of defiance manifesting in the thunder of coups that topple the old order, driven by leaders who refuse to perpetuate the chains of neo-colonialism. These are not mere power grabs, they are seismic upheavals, cries from the youth who have witnessed the ravaged soils, the poisoned rivers, and the hollow promises of development that leave our people destitute. Since 2020, Africa has seen a cascade of military interventions, 9 successful coups and at least as many failed attempts, clustered in the Sahel and beyond, where the grip of foreign exploitation is most vice-like. These young guardians of sovereignty, often in their 30s and 40s, rise not from ivory towers but from the barracks and the streets. Their eyes opened wide to the devastation wrought by decades of resource rape and environmental sabotage. They see clearly: the old guard, those septuagenarian statesmen entrenched in power through rigged elections and Western-backed patronage, have sold our birthright for scraps, consigning Africa to the ignominy of being the continent where over 60% of the population in sub-Saharan regions lives below the poverty line, scraping by on less than $2.15 a day amid vast untapped wealth. No more confidence do these youth place in the elders whose hands are stained with compromise. Instead, they seize the reins to forge a path toward true independence. Delve with me into this resurgence, beginning in the scorched heart of the Sahel, where Mali's double coups in 2020 and 2021 birthed a new era of resistance. Colonel Assimi Goïta, a mere 37 at the time of his ascent, led the charge against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, an aging figurehead whose regime was mired in corruption and beholden to French military presence under Operation Barkhane. Goita and his junta, comprised of officers in their prime, decried the neo-colonial stranglehold. French troops ostensibly fighting jihadists but in reality safeguarding uranium mines and economic interests that funneled Mali's gold and resources abroad while locals endured blackouts and famine. These young leaders, having grown up amid the ruins of IMF-imposed austerity that slashed public services and deepened poverty, where 41% of Malians live in extreme want, viewed the old men as architects of this misery, their alliances with Paris perpetuating a cycle where foreign aid masked exploitation. By 2022, Goita's regime expelled French forces, suspended mining permits for foreign firms accused of environmental crimes like mercury dumping in artisanal gold sites, and pivoted to Russian partnerships for security, vowing to nationalize resources and end the CFA franc's tether to French treasuries. This was no blind militarism, it was a generational reckoning, with youth rallies in Bamako chanting against the old thieves, whose policies left 70% of the workforce in precarious informal sectors, vulnerable to climate disruptions from foreign-aggravated droughts. Yet, even as they promised elections, the junta's grip tightened by 2025, sparking rare revolts against delayed transitions. But the core impulse remains, a youth-led purge of neo-colonial puppets. Echoes of this fury rippled to Burkina Faso, where in January 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba ousted President Roch Marc Christian Kabore, only for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, born in 1988, a spry 34 at the time, to stage a counter-coup in September that same year, embodying the impatience of a generation scarred by exploitation. Traoré, a product of Burkina's military academies, railed against the old elite's complicity in French-dominated gold mining that poisoned the land with cyanide leaks, displacing communities and fueling jihadist unrest while exporting billions to European refineries. He and his peers, witnessing how elders like Kabore, in power through networks tied to colonial-era pacts, oversaw an economy where 40% of the population wallows in poverty, with youth unemployment hovering at 30%, saw no future in the status quo. Traoré's regime swiftly terminated French military accords, expelled ambassadors, and launched audits of mining contracts, uncovering how foreign firms evaded taxes, contributing to Burkina's status as one of the world's poorest nations despite its mineral riches. Drawing inspiration from Thomas Sankara, his revolutionary predecessor assassinated for similar defiance, Traoré mobilized youth brigades for reforestation and irrigation projects to counter mine-induced weather instability, declaring, "We will not be slaves in our own land." This coup wave reflects a profound distrust. The old men, with their villas abroad and Swiss accounts filled from kickbacks, have normalized Africa's beggarly image, where despite GDP growth from raw exports, inequality soars, and basic services crumble under debt burdens imposed by Western lenders. Traoré's youthfulness amplifies the call. No longer will Africa's fate rest in arthritic hands that sign away sovereignty for personal gain. The tide swept into Niger in July 2023, where General Abdourahmane Tiani led the overthrow of President Mohamed Bazoum, aligning with a cadre of younger officers disillusioned by the old guard's failures. Though Tiani himself is older, the movement drew heavily from mid-level commanders in their 40s, who decried France's uranium extraction through Orano, which powered a third of French electricity, while Nigerians, 90% without reliable power, languished in darkness and poverty rates exceeding 40%. These leaders, having patrolled borders scarred by resource conflicts, blamed elders like Bazoum for perpetuating neo-colonial dependencies, ECOWAS sanctions that starved the poor, EU migration deals that turned Niger into a border guard for Europe, all while foreign mines depleted aquifers, destabilizing agriculture in a nation where 80% rely on farming amid erratic rains. The coup's aftermath saw mass youth protests in Niamey, waving Russian flags and burning French ones, a visceral rejection of the old men's diplomacy that invited exploitation. By 2024, the junta revoked mining licenses, joined the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Burkina Faso for mutual defense against Western interventions, and pursued uranium enrichment for domestic benefit, steps toward ending the poverty trap engineered by complicit gerontocracy. Further afield, in Guinea's 2021 coup, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, at 41, a symbol of youthful vigor, deposed the octogenarian Alpha Condé, whose third-term bid epitomized the old guard's grip on power amid bauxite bonanzas for Chinese and Western firms that left rivers silted and communities displaced. Doumbouya's manifesto targeted the corruption that funneled mineral revenues into elite pockets, sustaining Guinea's 55% poverty rate despite being the world's second-largest bauxite producer. Young supporters, weary of elders who amended constitutions to cling to office, hailed the takeover as a break from neo-colonial scripts. Similarly, Gabon's 2023 coup under General Brice Oligui Nguema, 48, ended the Bongo dynasty's 55-year rule, where Ali Bongo, son of the long-reigning Omar, presided over oil wealth siphoned by French companies like TotalEnergies, while two-thirds of Gabonese youth faced unemployment and poverty gripped 33% of the population. Nguema's regime promised resource audits and environmental reforms to heal oil spill-ravaged mangroves, reflecting a generational shift. The young, unburdened by colonial nostalgia, confront the old men's legacy of underdevelopment head-on. This pattern threads through Chad's 2021 transition under Mahamat Idris Deby, 37, who inherited but radicalized his father's regime against French influence, and even Sudan's 2021 coup amid broader unrest, each a testament to youth's erosion of faith in elders whose policies have entrenched Africa as the global poverty epicenter. With 433 million in extreme deprivation by 2023 projections, exacerbated by exploitation-fueled conflicts and climate woes. These coups, while fraught with risks of prolonged military rule, as seen in Mali's 2025 crackdowns on dissent, stem from a deep-seated conviction. The old guard's selfish alliances have bled our soil dry, their stability a euphemism for stagnation, leaving youth to inherit barren futures. And now, my kin, as the sun rises on this pivotal moment in our shared destiny, September 18, 2025, the revolution ignites not in whispers but in flames that engulf the old order, a Pan-African awakening surging through the veins of our continent to sever the neo-colonial arteries once and for all. This is no distant dream, it unfolds as we speak, in the defiant streets of Bamako, the resolute councils of Ouagadougou, the unyielding sands of Niamey, and beyond, where the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, forged from the coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, stands as the vanguard of sovereignty reclaimed. These nations, bound in September 2023 but fortified through 2025's trials, embody the revolution's pulse, a collective rejection of foreign puppeteers, a reclamation of resources, and a blueprint for Africa's rebirth. What began as military interventions has evolved into a multifaceted uprising, economic, cultural, military. Led by the young who refuse to inherit chains, inspiring ripples that threaten to tsunami across borders. Plunge deeper into this living firestorm, where the AES has not merely ousted leaders but dismantled the architecture of exploitation brick by brick. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's regime, now in its third year, has weathered multiple coup attempts in 2025 alone, foiled plots in June and whispers of others, backed by Western shadows desperate to reinstall compliant elders. Traoré, channeling Sankara's spirit, has nationalized gold mines, revoking licenses from Canadian and Australian firms accused of cyanide spills that ravaged farmlands, redirecting revenues to arm youth brigades against jihadists and to fund irrigation against mine-induced droughts. By mid-2025, Burkina's government has expelled French NGOs suspected of espionage, audited foreign contracts revealing billions in evaded taxes, and pivoted to Russian Wagner successors for security, all while launching a People's Tribunals to prosecute corrupt old guard officials whose Swiss accounts swelled from neo-colonial deals. This is revolution in motion. Young volunteers, many under 30, patrol borders once porous to French troops, planting trees to reclaim deforested mining zones, their chants echoing, "Africa for Africans." The result? Poverty rates, though stubborn, show early declines in rural areas as resource profits fund free healthcare and education, eroding the old men's legacy of destitution. In Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta's junta, extended through 2025 amid transitional delays, has deepened the anti-imperialist trench by withdrawing from the CFA franc zone in tandem with AES allies, a seismic break from French monetary control that has strangled economies since 1945. As of September, Mali has renegotiated uranium and gold deals, imposing 50% state ownership on foreign operations that once dumped mercury into the Niger River, poisoning fisheries and crops. Youth-led cooperatives now manage artisanal mining sites, distributing tools and profits locally, while Russian trainers bolster forces against insurgents fueled by resource chaos. The revolution here manifests in cultural resurgence. Bamako streets host festivals celebrating pre-colonial heroes, banning French curricula in schools to teach African history unfiltered. Yet, this boldness invites backlash. ECOWAS sanctions persist, but AES mutual aid, including shared intelligence, thwarts infiltration, as seen in a thwarted French-backed plot in early 2025. Goïta's young cadre, many battle-hardened millennials, embody the distrust of elders. We build where they betrayed, they declare, transforming barracks into hubs for vocational training, lifting communities from the 40% poverty abyss engineered by prior regimes. Niger's revolution, under General Abdourahmane Tiani, pulses with similar fervor, having closed U.S. and French bases by 2024 and, in 2025, advancing uranium enrichment for domestic energy, denying exports that lit European cities while leaving 90% of Nigerians in darkness. As we speak, Niamey's youth mobilize in sovereignty marches, demanding audits of oil pipelines that siphon wealth to multinationals, with recent decrees mandating environmental restitution for aquifer depletion that triggered famines. The AES Confederation, formalized in July 2024 and strengthened in 2025 summits, now plans a joint currency and army, a bulwark against neo-colonial incursions, inspiring solidarity pacts with Guinea and Chad. This alliance is the revolution's nucleus: shared markets for African goods, rejection of IMF debt traps, and cultural exchanges that revive Pan-Africanism. In May 2025, AES leaders convened in Ouagadougou to counter disinformation campaigns. Western media smears of massacres mirroring Libya's prelude, vowing collective defense. Youth across the Sahel, connected via social media, amplify this. Posts from Bamako to Niamey rally against recolonization, with hashtags like #AESStrong fueling virtual revolutions that spill into streets. This blaze spreads outward, igniting sparks in unexpected quarters. In Senegal, where French bases shuttered in July 2025 amid youth protests, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, elected in 2024 on an anti-corruption wave, audits oil contracts with British firms, echoing AES defiance. Kenya's Gen Z uprising, ongoing since June 2024 into 2025, topples IMF-backed taxes, with protesters chanting against neo-slavery loans that fund foreign infrastructure while slums fester. In Ivory Coast, murmurs of revolution swell, with May 2025 demonstrations demanding French troop withdrawal and cocoa nationalization, inspired by Sahel successes. Even in southern Africa, Mozambique's 2025 protests against gas exploitation by Italian giants and Angola's youth-led strikes against oil barons signal the contagion, no longer isolated coups, but a continent-wide revolt where young Africans, armed with smartphones and history's lessons, dismantle the old guard's complicity. Pivots to China and Russia for equitable partnerships, building hospitals without debt strings, contrast the West's plunder as AES nations export processed minerals, not raw ore, fostering industries that employ millions. Yet, this revolution is fraught. Jihadist threats, economic sanctions, and internal power struggles test its mettle. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's delays on elections spark dissent, but the core endures, a youth-driven purge of poverty's roots, where 433 million once suffered in silence. As coups evolve into governance, the old men flee or face justice, their villas abroad no shield from the tide. My brothers and sisters, this is our hour, the revolution that Lumumba foresaw, Sankara ignited, and the youth now wield like a sword against the darkness. Let us unite, not as fractured nations, but as one Africa, rising from exploited soils to claim our stars. No more bleeding for foreign kings, our resources, our waters, our weather, our future, ours alone. The chains shatter today. Tomorrow, we soar. Africa awakens. Africa endures. Africa triumphs.